The coins felt heavy in Neve's palm. 3 copper pieces. That was all she had left in the world. 3 coins that meant the difference between eating tonight and going hungry, between surviving another week and finally succumbing to the slow death that had been stalking her since her mother passed 6 months ago. She should have walked past the man bleeding in the alley. Anyone else would have. The streets of the lower city were full of violence and desperation, and getting involved in other people's troubles was the fastest way to end up dead yourself. Neve knew this. She had learned it the hard way, watching neighbors turn away when her mother cried for help, watching shopkeepers lock their doors when debt collectors came calling. But she could not walk past, not when his eyes met hers. He was slumped against the grimy wall, one hand pressed to his side where blood seeped through his torn shirt. His dark hair was matted with dirt and sweat, his face pale beneath a layer of bruises. He looked like he had been beaten within an inch of his life and left to rot in the filth. But his eyes, a striking shade of silver gray, were alert and fierce, watching her with the wariness of a wounded predator. "Please!" The word came out rough, barely more than a whisper. "I need a healer. I can pay you back, I swear it." Neve hesitated. The healers in this part of the city charged 2 coppers for the simplest treatments. She would have 1 coin left. 1 coin that might buy her a stale loaf of bread if she bargained hard enough. 1 coin between her and starvation. She looked at the stranger, at the blood pooling beneath him, at the way his breath rattled in his chest, at the desperate hope flickering in those silver eyes. And she made her choice. "Come on," she said, ducking under his arm and hauling him to his feet. He was heavy, far heavier than his lean frame suggested, and she staggered under his weight. "There is a healer 2 streets over. She owes me a favor. Maybe I can get her to lower the price." The stranger said nothing, but his arm tightened around her shoulders, and she felt something pulse between them. A warmth, strange and unfamiliar, spreading from where their bodies touched. She ignored it, focused on putting 1 foot in front of the other, on dragging this bleeding stranger through the labyrinth of alleys that made up her world. The healer took all 3 coins. She demanded 4, but Neve begged until her voice cracked, until tears streamed down her cheeks, until the old woman finally sighed and accepted the 3 coppers, with a muttered curse about soft-hearted fools. She stitched the stranger's wounds and gave him herbs for the fever already burning through his body, then shoved them both out the door with a warning not to come back without payment. Neve took the stranger to the only place she had left, the abandoned storefront where she had been sleeping since the landlord threw her out of her mother's apartment, a cramped space with a leaky roof and rats in the walls. She laid him on the pile of rags that served as her bed and watched over him through the night, feeding him sips of water when he stirred, pressing cool cloths to his forehead when the fever spiked. By morning, she was exhausted and starving and completely out of options. The stranger woke just as the first light of dawn crept through the cracks in the boarded windows. He blinked at her, confusion giving way to recognition, and then something else. Something that looked almost like wonder. "You saved my life," he said. His voice was stronger now, though still rough with pain. "You spent your last coins on a stranger you had never met." "How do you know they were my last coins?" "Because I can see it in your face, the hunger, the desperation." He pushed himself upright, wincing at the pull of his stitches. "Why did you do it?" Neve looked away, embarrassed by the intensity of his gaze. "Because someone had to. Because no one deserves to die alone in an alley like garbage." The stranger was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached out and took her hand, his fingers calloused and warm against her frozen skin. "My name is Caden Voss," he said quietly. "I am the crown prince of the Northern Realm, heir to the Alpha King, and I am going to repay your kindness 1,000-fold." Neve laughed. She could not help it. The sound burst out of her, sharp and bitter, echoing off the crumbling walls of her makeshift home. A crown prince. This man, covered in blood and grime, lying on a pile of rags in an abandoned building, claimed to be heir to the most powerful throne in the realm. "Of course you are," she said flatly, "and I am secretly a duchess who enjoys sleeping with rats for company." Something flickered across his face. Not anger, exactly. Something closer to amusement, mixed with a weariness that seemed to go bone deep. "I understand your disbelief." He reached up and pulled at a chain around his neck, drawing out a pendant that had been hidden beneath his torn shirt. The metal was silver, worked into the shape of a wolf's head with rubies for eyes. Even in the dim light, Neve recognized it. Everyone in the realm would recognize it. The royal seal, worn only by members of the ruling family. Her laughter died in her throat. "That could be stolen," she said weakly. "It could be." Caden tucked the pendant back beneath his shirt. "But it is not. I am exactly who I say I am, and I am in your debt." He studied her face, his silver eyes sharp despite his injuries. "I was attacked last night by men who want me dead. They nearly succeeded. If you had not found me, I would have bled out in that alley before dawn." Neve's mind raced. The crown prince, attacked and left for dead in the lower city. This was the kind of trouble that got people killed just for knowing about it. "You should leave," she said abruptly. "Go back to your palace, your guards, your physicians. Forget you ever met me." "I cannot do that." "Why not?" "Because you saved my life." He said it simply, as if it explained everything. "In my world, that creates a bond that cannot be ignored. You gave up everything you had for a stranger. That kind of selflessness deserves to be honored." "I do not want honor." Neve wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly aware of how thin her dress was, how visible her hunger must be. "I want to survive. And the best way for me to survive is to stay as far away from royal politics as possible." Caden was quiet for a moment. Then he pushed himself to his feet, swaying slightly before finding his balance. He was taller than she had realized, towering over her in the cramped space, his presence somehow filling the room despite his weakened state. "Come with me to the palace," he said. "Absolutely not." "You have no money, no food, no safe place to sleep." His voice was gentle but relentless. "Winter is coming, and you will not survive it in this building. Let me give you shelter, warmth, enough food to fill your belly. It is the least I can offer after what you did for me." Neve shook her head stubbornly. "I have survived on my own this long. I do not need charity." "It is not charity. It is a debt." Caden stepped closer, and she caught his scent beneath the blood and dirt. Pine and smoke and something wild, something that made her wolf stir restlessly in her chest. "Please, Neve, let me help you the way you helped me." She should have said no. She should have shoved him out the door and gone back to her miserable existence, scraping by on scraps and prayers. That was the safe choice, the smart choice. But she was so tired of being hungry, so tired of being cold, so tired of fighting alone against a world that seemed determined to crush her. "If I come with you," she said slowly, "I work. I will not be some pampered pet sitting in a gilded cage. I earn my keep." A smile tugged at the corner of Caden's mouth. "I would expect nothing less." He offered her his hand. Neve stared at it for a long moment, her heart pounding, her wolf whining with an eagerness she did not understand. Then she reached out and placed her fingers in his palm. That strange warmth flared again, stronger this time, racing up her arm and settling deep in her chest. Caden's breath caught, and his silver eyes widened with something that looked like shock. He felt it too. Whatever this was, it was not just her imagination. "What was that?" she whispered. Caden's jaw tightened. He did not answer her question. "We need to move," he said instead. "My enemies will still be searching for me, and this area is not safe." He kept hold of her hand as he led her toward the door. "Stay close to me. I will explain everything once we reach the palace." Neve followed him into the gray morning light, her last coins gone, her old life left behind, and her future suddenly, terrifyingly uncertain. The palace was everything Neve had imagined and nothing she was prepared for. She had seen it from a distance her whole life, a sprawling fortress of white stone and gleaming towers that dominated the city skyline. But standing in its shadow, walking through gates guarded by wolves the size of horses, climbing marble steps worn smooth by centuries of royal feet, she felt smaller than she ever had before. Every servant who passed stared at her with barely concealed disgust. Every guard's eyes swept over her ragged dress and tangled hair and dismissed her as unworthy. She did not belong here. That much was painfully clear. Caden seemed oblivious to the stairs, or perhaps he simply did not care. He kept her close as they moved through the palace corridors, his hand occasionally brushing against her back to guide her around corners and through doorways. Each touch sent that strange warmth pulsing through her veins, and she found herself leaning into it despite her better judgment. He took her to a suite of rooms in the guest wing, chambers larger than any building she had ever lived in. There was a bathing room with a copper tub already filled with steaming water, a wardrobe stocked with gowns in every color imaginable, a bed so massive she could have fit her entire former apartment inside it. "Rest," Caden said from the doorway. "Bathe, eat. There will be food sent up shortly." His silver eyes swept over her, and something soft flickered in their depths. "You are safe here, Neve. I promise you that." "Why are you doing this?" The question came out before she could stop it. "You do not know me. I am nobody, a gutter rat from the lower city who happened to stumble across you at the right moment." Caden was quiet for a long moment. Then he crossed the room and stopped directly in front of her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. "You are wrong," he said quietly. "You are not nobody. You are the woman who gave up her last coins to save a stranger's life. In my experience, that kind of person is rarer than gold." He reached up, hesitated, then gently brushed a strand of dirty hair from her face. "Rest now. I will return this evening, and I will explain everything, including what happened in that alley." He left before she could respond. Neve spent the afternoon in a daze. She bathed until the water turned gray with filth, then bathed again until her skin was pink and clean for the first time in months. She ate until her shrunken stomach ached, devouring bread and cheese and fruit and meats she had never tasted before. She dressed in a gown of soft blue wool, simple but finer than anything she had ever owned, and stared at herself in the mirror without recognition. The woman looking back at her was a stranger, clean and fed and clothed like a lady, with bright green eyes and auburn hair that fell in waves past her shoulders. She looked almost pretty, almost like she belonged. The lie of it made her chest ache. When evening came, Caden returned as promised. He had cleaned up as well, his dark hair brushed back from his face, his wounds hidden beneath a fresh linen shirt. Without the blood and grime, she could see him properly now. The sharp lines of his jaw, the aristocratic slope of his nose, the way his silver eyes seemed to glow in the candlelight. He was beautiful, dangerously so. "You look better," he said, settling into the chair across from her. "I could say the same about you." Neve folded her hands in her lap, fighting the urge to fidget. "You promised me answers." "I did." Caden leaned back, his expression growing somber. "What do you know about the line of succession in this realm?" "Only what everyone knows. The Alpha King rules until his death, then his heir takes the throne." "And if there are multiple heirs?" Neve frowned. "There is only one. You." "That is what the public believes." Caden's jaw tightened. "The truth is more complicated. My father had 2 sons. I am the elder, born to his queen. But my half-brother Declan was born to his mistress 3 years later. For most of our lives, Declan accepted his place as second. But recently, he has grown ambitious. And last night, he tried to have me killed. The words hit Neve like a punch to the gut. Your own brother? Half-brother, though even that feels like too generous a term for a man who would send assassins after his own blood. Caden's hands clenched on the arms of his chair. If I had died in that alley, Declan would have become the crown prince. He would have inherited everything. His silver eyes found hers, burning with intensity. You did not just save my life, Neve. You saved the future of this entire kingdom. Neve stared at him, the weight of his words pressing down on her chest. She had thought she was helping a stranger. Instead, she had stumbled into a war for the throne. And now, whether she liked it or not, she was caught in the middle of it. The days that followed settled into an unexpected rhythm. True to her word, Neve refused to sit idle. She insisted on working, and after much argument, Caden arranged for her to assist in the palace library. It was quiet work, organizing scrolls and dusting shelves and cataloging ancient texts that no one had touched in decades. The head librarian, a gruff old wolf named Bertram, was skeptical of her at first, but he warmed to her quickly when he realized she could actually read. Most of the young people these days cannot be bothered, he grumbled one afternoon, watching her carefully shelve a stack of histories. Too busy with politics and parties. But you have a sharp mind, girl. I can see it in the way you handle the books. Neve smiled at the compliment, one of the few she had ever received. My mother taught me. She believed that knowledge was the one thing no one could take from you. Wise woman, your mother. She was. Neve's throat tightened. She was the wisest person I ever knew. Caden found her in the library most evenings after his duties were done. He would settle into the worn armchair by the window and watch her work, asking questions about the books she had discovered, sharing stories about his own childhood spent hiding among these shelves. Slowly, piece by piece, they began to know each other. He told her about his mother, the queen who had died giving birth to a stillborn daughter when Caden was barely 10. He told her about his father, the Alpha King, a cold and distant man who had never recovered from the loss of his mate. He told her about growing up in the shadow of Declan's resentment, always watching his back, always waiting for the knife he knew would eventually come. In return, Neve told him about her own life, about her father, who had disappeared when she was 5, leaving nothing but debts and broken promises, about her mother, who had worked herself to the bone to keep them fed, taking in washing and mending until her hands cracked and bled, about the sickness that had stolen her mother away piece by piece, until there was nothing left but an empty bed and a mountain of bills Neve could never hope to pay. You were alone, Caden said one evening. They were sitting closer than usual, their shoulders almost touching, the warmth between them humming like a living thing. All that time, you had no one. I had myself. Neve shrugged, though the old pain still ached beneath her ribs. That was enough. It should not have had to be. His hand found hers in the dim light, his fingers lacing through her own. No one should have to face that kind of suffering alone. The touch sent heat racing up her arm, pooling in her chest like liquid fire. Her wolf stirred restlessly, pushing toward him with an urgency she did not understand. She should have pulled away. She should have maintained the careful distance she had been keeping between them, but she could not make herself let go. What is this? She whispered, staring at their joined hands. This feeling whenever you touch me. I have never experienced anything like it. Caden was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. It is called a mate bond, he said. It is the way our kind recognizes the one person we are meant to be with, our perfect match, our other half. He looked up at her, his silver eyes blazing with an intensity that stole her breath. I felt it the moment you touched me in that alley. I have been fighting it ever since, trying to convince myself it was just gratitude or proximity. but I cannot deny it anymore. Neve's heart slammed against her ribs. You are saying that I am your mate. I am saying that you might be. He reached up with his free hand and cupped her face, his thumb tracing the curve of her cheekbone. The bond has to be accepted by both parties. If you do not want this, if you do not want me, I will never mention it again. You can stay here as my guest, my friend, whatever you wish. I will not force something on you that you have not chosen. She stared at him, her mind spinning. A mate bond, with the crown prince. The future Alpha King wanted her, a penniless orphan from the lower city, to be his mate. It was impossible. It was terrifying. It was everything she had never allowed herself to want. I do not know what I want, she admitted. This is all happening so fast. Then take your time. Caden pressed a kiss to her forehead, soft and achingly tender. I am not going anywhere, Neve, and neither is this bond. He left her alone with her racing heart and her spinning thoughts, and somewhere in the palace she knew his brother was plotting their destruction. 2 weeks later, Neve stopped fighting. She had tried to keep her distance. She had tried to remind herself of all the reasons this could never work. She was a commoner, a nobody, a girl who had grown up scrubbing floors and stealing bread to survive. He was the crown prince, destined to rule an entire kingdom, expected to marry someone of noble blood who could give him heirs and political alliances. The gap between them was vast enough to swallow worlds. But none of that seemed to matter when he looked at her. It happened on a night like any other. Neve was alone in the library, shelving the last of the day's returns, when the door opened and Caden stepped inside. He was still dressed in his formal attire from some council meeting, his dark hair slightly disheveled, his silver eyes tired but brightening when they found her. I hoped you would still be here, he said. Where else would I be? She climbed down from the ladder, smoothing her skirts. This is the only place in this palace where I feel like myself. Is that why you hide here? He crossed the room toward her, his footsteps soft against the ancient carpet. Because you feel like yourself? I do not hide. The denial was automatic, but they both knew it was a lie. She had been avoiding the public areas of the palace, steering clear of the courtiers who whispered about her behind their hands, the noble ladies who looked at her like something scraped off the bottom of a shoe. Caden stopped in front of her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. You do not have to pretend with me, Neve. I know this world is cruel. I know they have not made it easy for you. It does not matter. She looked away, her chest tight. I am not here for their approval. Then what are you here for? The question hung between them, heavy with meaning. Neve felt her heart begin to race, felt the bond in her chest pulse with warmth, urging her toward him with an insistence she could no longer ignore. I do not know anymore, she whispered. I thought I was here because I had nowhere else to go. But now I think... She stopped, afraid to say the words aloud. What do you think? Caden's voice was barely more than a breath. His hand came up to cup her face, tilting her chin until she had no choice but to look at him. Tell me. Neve's resolve crumbled. I think I am here because of you, she admitted. Because every time I try to imagine leaving, something in my chest screams at the thought of being away from you. Because when you walk into a room, I cannot see anyone else. Because you make me feel like I matter, like I am worth something, for the first time in my entire life. Caden's breath caught. His silver eyes blazed with an emotion so intense it made her tremble. Neve, he murmured. Her name sounded like a prayer on his lips. I have been trying so hard to give you time, to let you choose at your own pace, but every day it gets harder to stay away from you. Then stop staying away. The words barely left her mouth before he kissed her. His lips were warm and firm against hers, gentle at first, almost questioning. But when she fisted her hands in the fabric of his shirt and pulled him closer, the gentleness gave way to hunger. He kissed her like she was air and he was drowning, like he had been waiting his entire life for this single moment. His arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her flush against his chest, and Neve melted into him completely. The bond between them exploded with light and heat, flooding through her veins until she could not tell where she ended and he began. Her wolf howled with triumph, with joy, with a fierce and primal recognition that went deeper than words. This was right. He was right. Whatever came next, she knew that with absolute certainty. When they finally broke apart, both gasping for breath, Caden pressed his forehead to hers and smiled. "I love you," he said quietly. "I think I have loved you since you stumbled into that alley and gave up everything you had to save me." Tears pricked at Neve's eyes. "I love you too. I was just too afraid to admit it." "And now?" "Now I am still afraid." She laughed through her tears. "But I am more afraid of losing you than I am of anything else." He kissed her again, softer this time, a promise and a vow wrapped into one. Neither of them noticed the shadow that slipped away from the library door. Neither of them saw Declan's face twisted with rage as he disappeared into the darkness. But they would learn soon enough that their love had just made them a target. The attack came 3 days later. Neve was walking through the palace gardens, enjoying a rare moment of solitude, when the hands grabbed her from behind. A cloth pressed over her mouth, soaked with something sweet and chemical, and the world dissolved into darkness before she could scream. She woke in chains. The room was cold and damp, lit by a single torch flickering in a rusted sconce. Stone walls pressed in on all sides, and the air smelled of mold and something metallic she recognized with sick certainty as old blood. She was sitting on a wooden chair, her wrists bound behind her back, her ankles shackled to the floor. A figure emerged from the shadows, and Neve's heart turned to ice. Declan Voss looked nothing like his brother. Where Caden was dark-haired and silver-eyed, Declan was golden and green-eyed, with a face that might have been handsome if not for the cruelty twisting his features. He smiled as he approached her, the expression of a cat that had cornered a particularly interesting mouse. "So this is the little street rat who stole my brother's heart," he said, circling her slowly. "I must admit, I expected someone more impressive. A noblewoman, perhaps, a foreign princess. Instead, he falls for a penniless orphan who cannot even afford to feed herself." "Where am I?" Neve's voice came out steadier than she felt. "What do you want?" "What I have always wanted." Declan stopped in front of her, crouching down to bring his face level with hers. "The throne, the power, everything that should have been mine from the beginning." His green eyes glittered with malice. "My mother was my father's true love. Did you know that? The queen was nothing but a political arrangement. But because she whelped her brat first, Caden inherits everything, and I am left with scraps." "So you tried to have him killed?" "I did, and I would have succeeded if not for you." Declan's smile widened. "Which is why you are here, little rat. You are going to help me finish what I started." Neve's blood ran cold. "I will never help you. You will not have to do anything." He straightened, brushing invisible dust from his immaculate coat. "You simply have to exist. Caden will come for you, because that is what lovesick fools do. And when he does, my men will be waiting." He gestured to the shadows, and Neve saw them for the first time. A dozen armed soldiers, their faces hard and merciless. The crown prince, killed trying to rescue his common whore. A tragic accident. The kingdom will mourn, and I will finally take my rightful place. Panic clawed at Neve's throat. She pulled against her chains, but they held fast, the metal biting into her wrists. "He will not come alone," she said desperately. "He will bring guards, an army. He will come alone, because I told him to." Declan pulled a folded note from his pocket. A message from his beloved, begging him to meet her in secret, warning him that bringing others will put her in danger. He tucked the note away again. My brother has many virtues, but caution has never been one of them. He will walk straight into my trap, and there is nothing you can do to stop it. He turned and walked toward the door, pausing at the threshold. Try not to make too much noise, he said over his shoulder. It would be a shame if I had to gag you before Caden arrives. I want him to hear you scream. The door slammed shut, and Neve was alone in the darkness. She pulled at her chains until her wrists bled, screaming until her voice gave out, but it was useless. The shackles were too strong, and no one could hear her through the thick stone walls. Caden was walking into a trap. He was going to die because of her, because he loved her, because she had been foolish enough to believe that someone like her could have a happy ending. Tears streamed down her face as the hours crawled past. She thought about her mother, who had fought so hard for so little. She thought about the 3 copper coins she had spent on a bleeding stranger in an alley. She thought about the way Caden looked at her, like she was the most precious thing in the world. She could not let him die. She would not. The bond in her chest pulsed with sudden warmth, and Neve felt something stir deep inside her. Her wolf, dormant her entire life, finally beginning to wake. It pressed against her consciousness, demanding to be released, demanding to protect the mate it had chosen. She did not know if she could shift. She had never managed it before, had been told by healers that she was too weak, too broken, too human, but she had never had anything worth fighting for until now. Neve closed her eyes, reached for that stirring presence inside her, and let go. The shift tore through her like wildfire. Pain exploded across every nerve, her bones cracking and reforming, her skin splitting and knitting back together in ways that should have been impossible. She screamed, but the sound came out wrong, too high and too raw, and then it was not a scream at all, but a howl. When she opened her eyes, the world had changed. Colors were muted, but scents were overwhelming. She could smell the rust of her chains, the mold on the walls, the distant traces of the guards who had been standing in the shadows. She could feel her body, smaller and sleeker than before, her paws scraping against the stone floor where her feet had been. She had shifted. For the first time in her life, she had actually shifted. The chains that had bound her human wrists now hung loose around her narrow wolf form. She wriggled free, her heart pounding with desperate hope. She could escape. She could find Caden, warn him before he walked into Declan's trap. The door burst open. Declan stood in the doorway, his face twisted with shock that quickly morphed into fury. Behind him, his soldiers drew their weapons, silver blades glinting in the torchlight. "Kill it!" Declan snarled. "Kill it now!" Neve ran. She was smaller than the soldiers, faster, her newly awakened instincts guiding her through gaps she would never have fit through in human form. She dodged between legs and under grasping hands, her claws scrabbling against the stone as she raced down corridor after corridor. She had no idea where she was, no idea which way led to freedom, but the bond in her chest pulled her forward like a compass pointing north. Toward Caden. Always toward Caden. She burst through a doorway and found herself in a vast underground chamber. Pillars of stone stretched toward a ceiling lost in shadow, and there, in the center of the room, was Caden. He stood surrounded by a ring of armed men, his sword drawn but lowered, his silver eyes fixed on something Neve could not see. He had come. Just as Declan had predicted, he had come alone. "Caden!" She tried to scream his name, but it came out as a bark, a desperate yip that echoed off the stone walls. His head snapped toward her. For a moment, confusion flickered across his face. Then recognition dawned, followed by horror. "Neve?" He took a step toward her. "How did you—" Touching, really. Declan's voice cut through the chamber as he emerged from a side passage, his soldiers fanning out behind him. The little rat learned a new trick. Unfortunately, it will not save either of you. Caden moved faster than Neve had ever seen anyone move. He grabbed her wolf form and shoved her behind him, putting his body between her and the advancing soldiers. "Let her go, Declan." His voice was deadly calm. "This is between us. She has nothing to do with it." "She has everything to do with it." Declan drew his own sword, the blade gleaming with a faint silver sheen. "She is the reason you survived that night in the alley. She is the reason my carefully laid plans fell apart. And she is the reason you are going to die with regret in your heart, knowing you could not protect the woman you love." The soldiers closed in. There were too many of them, Neve realized with mounting horror. Even for an alpha as strong as Caden, there were simply too many. "Run," Caden murmured to her, so quietly only her wolf ears could hear. "When they attack, run and do not look back. Find my father. Tell him what happened here." Neve whined, pressing against his leg. She could not leave him. She would not. "Please," his voice cracked with desperation. "I cannot lose you too. Run!" Declan raised his sword. "Kill them both!" The soldiers charged. Caden met them like a storm made flesh, his blade singing through the air, cutting down one man after another. But for every soldier who fell, two more took their place. Blood sprayed across the stone floor. Steel clashed against steel. And slowly, inevitably, Caden began to tire. Neve watched in horror as a blade sliced across his arm. Another caught his thigh, sending him stumbling. He was going to die. He was going to die right in front of her, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. No. She refused to accept that. She threw herself into the fray, her small wolf form darting between legs, her teeth finding flesh wherever she could reach. She bit and clawed and fought with everything she had, ignoring the kicks and blades that caught her sides. Pain meant nothing. Fear meant nothing. Only Caden mattered. A boot caught her ribs and sent her flying across the chamber. She hit the wall with a sickening crack and crumpled to the ground, unable to move, unable to breathe. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was Caden screaming her name as Declan's soldiers dragged him to his knees. Neve woke to the sound of thunder. No, not thunder. Wolves. Dozens of them, their howls shaking the very stone around her, their paws pounding through the corridors like an approaching storm. She forced her eyes open, every breath sending agony lancing through her broken ribs, and watched the chaos unfold. The Alpha King had come. He was enormous in his wolf form, a beast of silver and black that dwarfed every other creature in the chamber. He tore through Declan's soldiers like they were made of paper, his massive jaws closing around throats and limbs with savage precision. Behind him came the royal guard, wolves and armed men alike, their battle cries echoing off the walls as they overwhelmed the traitors. Declan scrambled backward, his face white with terror, his sword shaking in his grip. "Father, wait. This is not what it looks like. Caden attacked me. I was only defending myself." The Alpha King shifted mid-stride, his human form emerging from the beast in a ripple of power. He was older than Neve had imagined, his dark hair streaked with silver, his face lined with years of rule. But his eyes were the same shade as Caden's, and they burned with a fury that made even his own guards shrink back. "You think I do not know what you have done?" His voice was a thunderclap in the sudden silence. "You think I have not watched you plot and scheme for years, waiting for you to make your move?" He stepped over the bodies of fallen soldiers, advancing on his younger son with the inexorable force of a glacier. "I gave you every chance to prove yourself worthy, every opportunity to earn your place, and this is how you repay me. With treachery, with murder." "He was always your favorite," Declan spat, his composure cracking. "From the moment he was born, he was all you cared about, the precious heir, the perfect prince. What was I supposed to do? Accept scraps for the rest of my life? You were supposed to be his brother." The Alpha King's voice broke on the word. You were supposed to stand beside him, not stab him in the back. Neve dragged herself across the floor, her wolf form too injured to maintain. She shifted back with a gasp of pain, her human body bruised and bleeding but still moving. She had to reach Caden. She had to make sure he was alive. She found him slumped against a pillar, his wrists bound, his face battered, but his silver eyes open and alert. When he saw her crawling toward him, something like relief flooded his expression. Neve. Her name was a broken prayer on his lips. You are alive. So are you. She reached him and pressed her forehead to his, tears streaming down her face. I thought I had lost you. Never. His bound hands found hers, gripping tight despite the ropes. I will never leave you, not as long as I draw breath. Behind them, the confrontation reached its crescendo. Declan lunged at his father with a desperate cry, his sword arcing toward the Alpha King's throat. But the old wolf was faster. He caught Declan's wrist, twisted, and the blade clattered to the floor. In one fluid motion, he had his son pinned against the wall, his hand around his throat. I should kill you, the Alpha King growled. For what you have done, I should tear out your heart and feed it to the crows. Then do it. Declan's voice was strangled but defiant. Prove that you are the monster I always knew you were. For a long moment, the chamber held its breath. Then the Alpha King released his grip and stepped back, his expression hardening into something cold and final. Death would be too easy, he said. You will live, Declan. You will live in exile, stripped of your name and your birthright, knowing that everything you ever wanted has been denied to you forever. He turned to his guards. Take him to the northern wastes. If he ever sets foot in this kingdom again, kill him on sight. Declan screamed as the guards dragged him away, his curses and threats echoing through the corridors until they faded into silence. The Alpha King turned to where Neve sat cradling Caden against her chest. His expression softened as he took in the sight of them, battered and bleeding but alive, clinging to each other like they were the only solid things in a spinning world. So this is the girl who saved my son's life, he said quietly. The one who spent her last coins on a stranger. Neve lifted her chin, refusing to cower despite the pain radiating through her body. I did not know who he was. I know. The Alpha King knelt before them, and something like respect flickered in his ancient eyes. That is what makes it matter. He reached out and placed his hand on her shoulder. You have proven yourself braver than warriors, more loyal than nobles who have served this crown for generations. I owe you a debt that can never be repaid. Neve looked at Caden, at the love shining in his silver eyes despite everything they had just endured. You owe me nothing, she said softly. I already have everything I need. The healers worked through the night. Neve drifted in and out of consciousness, aware only of gentle hands and murmured voices and the constant, steady presence of Caden beside her. He refused to leave, even when his own wounds needed tending. He sat at her bedside and held her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her skin, anchoring her to the world of the living. When she finally woke properly, 3 days had passed. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, filling the room with warmth and gold. She was in a bed softer than clouds, surrounded by silk sheets and plush pillows, and for a moment she thought she was dreaming. Then she turned her head and found Caden watching her, and she knew it was real. You look terrible, she croaked. He laughed, a rough sound that cracked with relief. His eyes were red-rimmed, his jaw shadowed with stubble, his arm bandaged from shoulder to wrist. But he was smiling, and that smile made everything worth it. You nearly died, he said. You threw yourself into a fight against a dozen armed soldiers to protect me. I think I am allowed to look a little rough. I could not let them hurt you. Neve tried to push herself upright, wincing at the pull of her healing ribs. You are too important. To the kingdom? To me. Caden's expression softened. He leaned forward and pressed his forehead to hers, breathing her in like she was the air he needed to survive. I thought I had lost you, he whispered. When you hit that wall, when you stopped moving, I thought my heart would stop. I have never been so afraid in my entire life. I am still here. She reached up and cupped his face, feeling the rough stubble beneath her palm. I am not going anywhere. Promise me, his voice cracked. Promise me you will never do something so reckless again. Neve smiled despite the tears pricking at her eyes. I cannot promise that. Not when it comes to protecting you. Caden pulled back, and something shifted in his expression. Something determined and almost nervous, which seemed impossible for a man who had faced down assassins and his own murderous brother. There is something I need to say, he began. Something I have been planning for weeks before any of this happened. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. Neve's breath caught. I had a whole speech prepared, Caden continued, opening the box to reveal a ring of white gold set with a stone that shimmered like captured starlight. I was going to take you to the gardens at sunset. There were going to be flowers and music and all the things I thought you deserved. He laughed softly. Instead, we are both half dead in a sick room, and I cannot wait another moment. Tears spilled down Neve's cheeks. Caden, let me finish. He took her hand, sliding the ring onto her finger with trembling hands. You walked into my life when I was bleeding in an alley, and you gave up everything you had to save me. You did not know I was a prince. You did not care. You saw someone who needed help, and you helped them, even though it cost you everything. He lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. I have met princesses and noblewomen from every corner of this realm. I have been offered alliances and treaties and political marriages that would make my kingdom stronger, but none of them have ever made me feel the way you do. His silver eyes blazed with emotion. You are brave and kind and stubborn beyond reason. You are my mate, Neve, my heart, my home, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving that I am worthy of you. Neve was crying openly now, tears streaming down her face, her heart so full she thought it might burst. I am a nobody, she whispered, a street rat from the lower city. Your court will never accept me. Then I will burn the court to the ground and build a new one. His voice was fierce. I do not care what they think. I only care about you. Your father. My father already gave his blessing. Caden smiled. He told me that any woman brave enough to fight a dozen soldiers for his son was brave enough to be a queen. Neve looked down at the ring on her finger, at the way the stone caught the light and scattered it into 1,000 tiny rainbows. She thought about the girl she had been just months ago, starving and alone, spending her last coins on a stranger in an alley. She thought about the woman she had become. Yes, she breathed. Yes, I will marry you. Caden's face split into a smile so bright it rivaled the sun. He gathered her into his arms, careful of her healing ribs, and kissed her with all the tenderness and passion she had come to expect from him. Outside the window, church bells began to ring, as if the whole kingdom was celebrating with them. And perhaps, in a way, it was. 1 year later, the kingdom crowned its new queen. The ceremony was the grandest in living memory, with nobles and commoners alike gathering to witness the coronation. Neve walked down the aisle in a gown of silver and white, her auburn hair crowned with a circlet of diamonds that caught the light like captured stars. The whispers that had once followed her through the palace halls had long since faded, replaced by something that sounded almost like awe. She was no longer the street rat who had stumbled into royal life. She was Queen Neve Voss, beloved of the people, champion of the poor, and mate to the most powerful alpha in the realm. Caden waited for her at the altar, his silver eyes shining with a love so fierce it stole her breath. When she reached him, he took her hands and held them like she was the most precious thing in the world. You look beautiful, he murmured. You look like you are about to cry. I might be. He laughed softly. Is that allowed for a king? I will allow it. She squeezed his hands. Just this once. The Alpha King himself performed the coronation, placing the crown upon Neve's head with a solemnity that made her chest ache. He had grown frail in recent months, his body finally succumbing to the years he had spent fighting for his kingdom. But his eyes were clear and proud as he looked upon his son and his new daughter. You have given my son something I never could, he told her quietly as the crowd erupted in cheers. You have given him joy. That night, after the feasting and dancing had ended, Neve and Caden escaped to the palace gardens. The moon hung full and heavy in the sky, bathing everything in silver light. They walked hand in hand through the paths where they had first begun to fall in love, and Neve marveled at how much had changed. I have something to tell you, she said as they stopped beside the fountain where he had first told her about the mate bond. Caden turned to face her, concern flickering in his eyes. What is it? Is something wrong? Nothing is wrong. She took his hand and pressed it against her stomach, still flat, but harboring a secret she had been carrying for weeks. Everything is perfect. It took him a moment to understand. She watched the realization dawn across his face, watched his silver eyes widen with shock, and then flood with a joy so overwhelming it brought tears streaming down his cheeks. A pup, he breathed. We are going to have a pup. We are. Neve laughed through her own tears. I found out last week. I wanted to wait until after the coronation to tell you. Caden swept her into his arms and spun her around, his laughter ringing through the garden like music. When he set her down, he kissed her with all the passion and tenderness she had come to cherish, his hands cradling her face like she was made of glass. I love you, he said against her lips. I love you more than I ever thought it was possible to love anyone. I love you too. She pressed her forehead to his, more than words could ever say. Later they shifted together and ran through the forest beyond the palace walls, two wolves racing beneath the moonlight. Neve's wolf was strong now, fully awakened, matching her mate stride for stride as they celebrated the life growing inside her. She had spent her last coins on a stranger in an alley, never knowing who he was or what that single act of kindness would bring. Now she was a queen, a wife, and soon a mother, surrounded by more love than she had ever dared to dream. The girl who had once had nothing finally had everything, and she would never let it go.